Hi guys, Micah Fights with Friends. Usually when MMA news comes out in the morning and I see a headline or something, usually it doesn't really surprise me because there's been something I've been following in the rumorville. This is something that I believe is likely to happen, or at least I know it might happen. This one really took me by surprise this morning. ONE FC has been talking about signing new, larger stars. Recently, of course, they signed Eddie Alvarez, and the UFC got nothing for him. That was before we really even thought, I guess, about trading fighters. Then after that, ONE FC trades Ben Askren, who was retired and not doing them any good. He had no ambition to fight for ONE FC. Did have an ambition to fight for the UFC. UFC looks like they've been on the way to getting rid of the flyweight division. All signs point to that, especially after Dana White traded the greatest 125-pound champion of all time, Demetrius Johnson, to ONE FC. So that seems like a win-win for each organization. I think that's hard to argue. ONE FC wasn't getting anything for Askren. Demetrius Johnson, the UFC, for whatever reason, I believe had failed to promote him properly, but he was not selling the pay-per-views that other champions were. So when I woke up this morning, I expected to hear something about the signing. If it's signing or somebody cut, I expected to hear, somebody cut that's been around for a while, that's older. The UFC's got a lot of fighters right now, but I didn't expect to see a young, up-and-coming fighter come up. Somebody that seems like they had been so close and valued by Dana White. Came up through his Looking for a Fight reality show, was the biggest find, I would say, by far on that show. There's maybe been as big, or you could argue bigger finds recently on The Contender. But the person I'm talking about, if you haven't seen yet, of course, is Sage Northcutt. Now, Sage Northcutt was a free agent. He fought the last fight on his contract. He won his last fight at 170 against Zach Otto. He's been 7-2 in the UFC up to this point. 5-0 at 155 pounds. So I was very surprised. I did not expect them to get rid of this kid. And Dana White's comments after that seemed even stranger. But let's go into what he said, and then let's talk about what I really think is the real reason and what is in the near future for Mr. Sage Northcutt. Now let's go to an article from just this morning on MMAfighting.com. I'll leave the link to this article in the description. It says the UFC is moving on from Sage Northcutt for now. Little's been heard from Super Sage since his last fight at UFC Boise this past July, and Dana White confirmed Tuesday during an appearance on the UFC Unfiltered podcast, Tuesday, that being today, that Northcutt is no longer with the promotion. His contract was up, so we let him go, White said simply. He went on, though. He said, we let Sage go. Sage is young, and Sage needs some work. So let him go work in some of these other organizations, and we'll see where this kid ends up in a couple of years, and maybe we'll pick him up again. This does not sound like the same relationship, the love relationship that Dana White had with Sage Northcutt coming in. Which leads me to believe that I would almost say, without inside knowledge, that this 100% has something to do with a beef between Sage Northcutt and Dana White. and it may be to do with his proposed YouTube bouts. Maybe Dana White wants to send a statement saying, hey, you want to talk about, fighting in YouTube with these guys, you want to talk about these other things, your mind's not focused on the UFC, why don't you go play somewhere else for a while and we'll think about letting you back in. This guy's young, he's 22 years old, he looks like a Hollywood star. I know a lot of fighters were jealous of him because they felt that he was like a darling. A lot of fans, kind of didn't like him for some of the same reasons, but he certainly had a lot of fans. Some fans didn't like him because he had so many fans so quickly. That's just the way us MMA fans are. We're strange. But where does Sage Northcutt go from here? We've talked about some of the money that some of these YouTube guys, Logan Paul, just had a fight that sold, I believe, 800,000 pay-per-views at $10 a pop. That's $8 million. Splits it halfway with his opponent. They also sold out, I believe it was Wembley Stadium in England. One of the bigger stadiums over there. I don't have it up in front of me. But this has got to be some kind of beef. Or some kind of breakdown in contract negotiations. Because I guarantee you Sage comes in and says, hey, I'll fight for X, and it's around the amount that fighters with his record and his skill set have been signing for. Dana White re-signs this kid in a second. I don't believe it. I don't believe for 1 second that he did not want this kid. The whole MMA world seems to be stunned by this. There were no signs from anybody that this was coming. I'm bringing up what is his SureDog record right now. Like I said, he's 6 feet tall. He trains with Team Alpha Male. He's 11-2 overall, 7-2 in the UFC. And I'm looking through his record. Of course, he was undefeated coming into the UFC, which a lot of fighters are, but he only had 4 fights. And 3 of them were in the LFC, which has been, basically they've become the proving ground. If the minor leagues for the UFC, if you will. They've been pulling a lot of fighters out of Legacy Fighting Championships. You see a large percentage of the fighters on Dana White's Contender being from LFC, and you see a lot of the fighters just coming straight over that are being signed from LFC. That's their biggest promotion that they're pulling from right now. So he comes into the UFC 5-0, beats Francisco Trevina, 57-second first-round knockout, submits Cody Pfister by guillotine, 41 seconds, second round. Drops a fight, submission, arm triangle choke, fighters lose fights to Brian Barberina, 3 minutes and 6 seconds of the second round, bounces back, gets a decision win over Enrico Marin, fights a very tough Mickey Gall. This guy, he's got some skills, and he was right there. He was thought to be, I think, is right there with Sage Northcutt. Their stars both were shining, and I'm not sure if that fight came too early. If I was a promotion, I would not have made the fight that early, because I think you build those guys up first. But he loses to Mickey Gall. Dude's super young, so he's got plenty of time to learn from that. Beats Michael Quinones by unanimous decision. Tibalt Gowdy, unanimous decision after moving up to welterweight. Both those fights. Goes up, fights Zach Otto, and wins impressively by second round knockout from punches. I was there cage side at that fight. He looked absolutely amazing, not only in his execution, but physically he looked like an amazing specimen. He was trying out for Rocky, the new Rocky movie, Creed 2 at the time, and his star looked to be shining very brightly. And then all of a sudden, he starts getting into these Twitter interactions with YouTubers, making a ton of money for fighting boxing matches, 3-round boxing matches on YouTube. Say what you will about all the millions of people that watched it illegally. 800,000 people popped down $10 for that, as well as, I believe, about 60,000 to see it live. So what would they pay to see an actual great fighter that looks like a Hollywood star? And what would ONE FC pay? This guy, let's look at a few more of his options. If he goes to Bellator at 155, I think you put him in there against a couple B-level opponents. Scott Coker's very savvy. You give him a few, tougher opponents, but fights that he should win. He's probably around the 2-1 favorite. Let him win 3 fights in a row. Hope he does it impressively, and then you give him a bigger test. If he becomes your 155-pound champion, I don't see him being the 170-pound champion because he's not in Rory McDonald's class at all. But if he ends up getting that 155-pound championship one day, or Bellator decides to beat UFC to the punch and brings in the 165-pound division, moves 170 to 175, he could compete there. There's a lot of options over there, but you've seen what they've done with Michael Chandler, and they've kind of made him the centerpiece of their organization. I could see this guy being their Michael Chandler in waiting. He's not the top of the food chain when it comes to the UFC, and he's not Michael Chandler level just yet. Don't get me wrong. I'm not dissing Michael Chandler. Michael Chandler is getting older. This kid's very young. If he's growing for a few years in an organization, especially like I said, getting not easy fights, fights to build him up. They do this in boxing all the time, and almost no one accuses anyone of taking easy fights until you get big, until you're like, the champion, or you're one of the very top people. So I think Sage Northcutt could easily get away with a few, quote, feeder fights over there in Bellator before he's tested, especially if he has some impressive wins. I think this is a big loss for the UFC. I don't know what the intricacies were of the negotiations. I can't even find anywhere. Dana didn't even talk about getting into negotiations. All he said was, this kid's got to learn. This kid's not at the level to be in the UFC. Well, clearly he is. He beat 6 of your 8 fighters that, they're not top 10 guys, but some of these guys are top 20. Maybe, top 20, top 30 in very deep divisions. Michael Quinones, the win over Cody Pfister, Francisco Trevino. They're not household names, but most MMA fans know who they are. So they're, top 30, top 40 at 155, and that doesn't sound super impressive until you realize, if you don't know, that over half the fighters, around the half the fighters in the UFC right now, over 300 are in the 155-pound division. Now, is that the division getting very busy? Are they starting to let a lot of people go? Yes, you've seen Khalees Tebow. He's no longer in the UFC. He just fought for Oscar De La Hoya's promotion. You've seen, other names disappear, fighting for PFL, Bellator, and other places. But I am just very surprised, and I wake up this morning and say, I'm surprised, mother. I can't say I'm not surprised. I'm extremely surprised about this one. I'm very curious to see what comes out as to how much Sage Northcutt was asking, what his relationship was with Dana White, how it soured, and what the intricacies are. We'll probably never know all of it, but I've invited Mr. Northcutt, Sage, on the show to talk about it. I'm hoping to get him on here quickly. If anybody's watching this, or if Sage Northcutt somehow comes across this, please contact Mike at Fights with Friends, or email me at fightswithfriends@gmail.com. Anybody that has a relationship with him, try to get a hold of him. I've been having a hard time contacting him or his people. He doesn't have a lot of people now that he's not in the UFC. I don't really know who his direct reps are, and I can't contact him personally right now. So that would be much appreciated. I want to know what you guys think down there in the comments. Let's start the conversation, and I'll look at this throughout the day and interact with you guys. Is this a huge surprise for you, or did you see this coming? If you've seen this coming, what were the signs? Is this a good decision for the UFC? Is this a guy that just doesn't fit in the UFC anymore at any price? Do you think that he just doesn't have the skill sets? He needs to go away somewhere else and rebuild those? I'm just going to jump in for a minute. I mean, he's already been to the UFC Proving Grounds, LFC. They pulled him out of there. So I'm not quite sure how it would make sense going back there, except for the fact I guess he didn't have an LFC belt. So maybe he goes back there for that. Maybe he goes to one of these other organizations. Fury Fighting was the other promotion he fought for. I see him most likely ending up over in ONE FC if he's willing to move to Singapore. I think they could make a big star out of him. That and Bellator. I think they're almost neck and neck in competition. And don't be surprised that if you see him announce some kind of YouTube fight promotion in the meantime, and I'll help him promote it on the show, because he's part of the MMA community. He's a fighter. I'm a fighter advocate, and I'll do whatever I can to help him if he's watching, or somebody who knows him is watching. But like I said, please hit that like button. If you're new here, please subscribe to this channel so you're notified when a new video comes back up, or when I go live in our many fight companions that we have on here, and our new MMA trivia show. As always, I love you, I respect you, and I'll see your fine asses later.